My name is Sydney. At the end of December, I visited my in-laws' house with my husband Simon. I handed a gift to my mother-in-law Marissa, who welcomed us, saying, "Thank you everything for this year, Marissa." "Oh, you brought another wonderful gift this year," she replied. "Yes, it's a recommended gift set from the factory I work at. I'm sorry it's not wrapped." "That's all right, it's the thought that counts." Marissa opened the box with a smile. Her eyes sparkled as she looked inside. "All sorts of fish cakes. Tamago sushi, there's so much in here. And it's all perfect for Christmas. That's really helpful," she said. "It's just a small token of my gratitude for all you do." "Thank you so much. Please come inside." "All right, we're coming in," I said cheerfully and entered the in-laws' house. And there, Simon said something to me.
"Even so, you really get along well with Mom, don't you?"
"Do I? I think it's pretty normal."
"Not at all. Many of my colleagues struggle with choosing between their wives and mother-in-law during Christmas."
"Oh, really?" I said, surprised.
"Yeah, I consider myself very fortunate in that regard. Plus, you even buy gifts from your workplace."
"I do get an employee discount after all."
"That's perfect. Mom is always happy with them."
Simon said that and then headed into the back room. Indeed, my relationship with Marissa was going well. However, I never imagined it would be this good initially. That's because my first impression with my parents-in-law was terrible. The first time I met them was when we went to announce our marriage. "It's nice to meet you, I'm Sydney, and I'm in a relationship with Simon," I said nervously. To my tense greeting, Simon's father, Stephen, asked,
"What do you do for work, Sydney?"
"I work in a factory that makes fish cakes and similar products."
"Factory work?"
Stephen's face became stern. Wondering if I said something odd, I looked at Stephen. Then Marissa, as if to cover for me, said, "Oh, you're making fish cakes. I love fish cakes." "Really? There are so many varieties nowadays, so if you like..." I offered the gift set from our factory. However, Stephen looked displeased and said,
"Fish cakes as a gift for a marriage introduction. Truly foolish."
"Foolish?"
"You work in a factory and don't even know how to choose gifts. I suppose you didn't even graduate from university."
Indeed, I didn't graduate from university, but I've never felt ashamed of either not having a degree or working in a factory. Yet, Stephen looked down on me saying,
"If Simon wants to marry you, I'll accept it. But make sure you don't cause me any trouble. I don't plan to rely on Dad. Don't worry, we won't be a bother. Remember those words. People who are poor change dramatically the moment they get money." "Huh? Who are you calling poor?" "That fool Sydney. Just remember, don't you think you can get help from me as a lawyer if anything happens?"
Stephen glared at me as he said this. Then he excused himself, saying he had work, and left. I felt increasingly awkward. I should probably go." Unable to bear the awkwardness, I was about to flee from the scene. But Simon pulled my hand, saying,
"Sydney, don't worry about Dad. Let's have a meal before we go."
"Yes, Sydney, since you've come, please stay a while." Marissa also said that, insisting that I stay. I reluctantly sat down again, thinking I'm not feeling very good. Marissa clapped her hands and said, "Let's all eat together. We have prepared dishes and there are fish cakes Sydney brought." "Oh, I can help too." "Really? Then let's have your help." And so, on the day I met Marissa, I ended up helping with the meal preparation. As soon as I entered the kitchen, Marissa started talking to me. "By the way, Sydney, do you plan to continue working after marriage?" "Yes, I intend to." "If you do continue working, make sure you handle housework moderately and get Simon to help when it gets tough." "But is that really..." "It's not good to do everything yourself and not let your husband help. Otherwise, you'll end up like my husband." Marissa smiled. "I see." Marissa also had grievances with Stephen. I began to understand the dynamics between Marissa and Stephen a bit more. While preparing the meal, I listened to Marissa's complaints. It turned out Marissa had a never-ending list of grievances about Stephen. She complained so much that it was exhausting to hear. But it was exactly because of that incident that Marissa and I could form a good relationship. However, things with Stephen remained awkward. At the wedding speech, Stephen demeaned me.
I'm quite worried about Sydney, who seems to work in a factory. Maybe she doesn't know how to handle money properly.
Some of Stephen's associates laughed, but many others just gave a wry smile. Yet, Stephen kept talking in the same manner. After the wedding, Stephen continued to look down on me. For instance, when we visited the in-laws' house, he would ask me,
How's your job? Have you gotten into any debt?
Everything is fine, Stephen.
Really? Someone foolish like you would start wasting your husband's salary the moment you get married.
That's not true at all.
Can you believe it? The words of a poor person who's never had money.
Stephen said harshly. He had always been like this, causing not just me but also Simon to be fed up. But I couldn't change my job or life at this point. Complaining to Stephen would only worsen our relationship, so all I could do was endure. It was around that time. Due to the rising costs of energy and raw materials, the factory where I worked was in jeopardy.
The factory might go bankrupt if things continue this way. Is there any way you can help?
The factory owner asked the bank. He had been polite in his approach, but the loan officer turned him down. The refusal was due to an unclear business plan and uncertain future prospects. Because of these issues, my factory was on the brink of bankruptcy. And so, the factory might go bankrupt. I shared my concerns with Simon. Simon frowned and said,
That's tough. What should we do?
What do you think?
Maybe Dad could do something about it.
Simon seemed very hesitant. In truth, I didn't want to rely on Stephen, who often belittled me. I could have chosen the escape route of becoming a housewife since I was married. Yet, if I did nothing and let the factory go bankrupt, I knew I'd regret it. After much thought, I decided to approach Stephen politely. Stephen, please help Gabriel.
Only asking for help when you're in trouble, huh? How convenient.
Stephen scoffed, looking away. Then Simon, standing next to me, also politely addressed Stephen.
If Sydney's factory goes bankrupt, we'll have to live on my salary alone. My pay isn't that high, and we might struggle to meet our ends. That's not my concern. But what if we end up in debt? Debt collectors could come knocking on Dad's door. I shouldn't have approved of such a foolish marriage.
Stephen grumbled, but eventually he agreed to help. He then made a phone call. After a while, he hung up.
I've begged the bank's loan manager on your behalf. You'll have to talk to the loan manager yourself.
Thank you, Stephen.
Just remember, I've only arranged for you to meet the loan manager. It doesn't guarantee that you'll get the loan.
Stephen warned, smiling challengingly. Stephen probably thought we'd be rejected again, as we had already been turned down once. However, Stephen's expectations were about to be proven wrong. Amazingly, the newly submitted business plan was accepted, and the negotiations were successful. Thanks to this, the factory where I worked received the necessary funding and avoided bankruptcy. However, the fact that we were helped by Stephen remained unchanged. Now, I might face even more sarcasm from him. I was feeling down, hoping that I was just overthinking. But it turned out I wasn't. But, as it turned out, my concerns were not overblown. Every time Stephen saw me, he started making sarcastic remarks. Even during Christmas, at the family's memorial service, Stephen found a way to belittle me.
What? You're here too? Don't you have factory work to do?
He asked. Oh, yes, I took the day off for the memorial service, I replied.
Can you take time off? Isn't the factory always running?
He prodded. No, my factory operates from morning till evening.
What a bore. With such a low salary, you should be working harder.
And it went something like that. This made visits to the in-laws' house increasingly troublesome for me. Just the thought of seeing Stephen again made me feel uneasy. However, I do like Marissa and wanted to see her at least once a year. Plus, there's the tradition of Simon's relatives gathering at Christmas. Torn, my desire to greet Marissa and help her with her annual event outweighed my apprehensions, and so I decided to visit again this year. It's just a few days of patience. As I muttered, Marissa's voice came from behind. Is something troubling you? Oh no, it's nothing. Are you worried about him? He'll always speak ill of Sydney. Marissa was referring to Stephen. She was being considerate, making sure our conversation could be overheard without issue. It's okay, I came because I wanted to see Marissa again this year. That's so nice to hear. Come on, Marissa, let's get ready for Christmas. We'll have a lot of people visiting again this year. Right, we can't serve embarrassing dishes for our Christmas tradition. Yes, I'll help too. Really? Are you sure? I've prepared well this year. Then maybe you can make a few dishes this year. So, I started cooking with Marissa. Many relatives would gather for Christmas in a few days. It's an annual event, but preparing with Marissa is quite a task. However, I couldn't help but admire her because, before I married Simon, Marissa used to prepare everything alone. I've studied various recipes, so I think I can handle any Christmas dish. I'll do my best to make it easier for Marissa. Oh, that's reassuring. Then, could you please take care of this? Yes. As we were preparing the Christmas meal, suddenly Stephen entered the kitchen. Looking around the kitchen, Stephen asked,
Hey, isn't there anything to eat?
Oh, are you hungry? Marissa asked Stephen. Stephen, annoyed, replied,
I'm just looking for some appetizers.
I see. Sydney, could you bring out the carpaccio from the fridge? Marissa pointed to the refrigerator while looking at me. Understood. As I opened the fridge, Stephen, with a nasty smile, said,
What? You're cooking too?
Yes, I'm helping Marissa.
Are you really helping? Let me see, what are you making?
Stephen looked at what I had been preparing. Seeing the vegetables on the cutting board, Stephen said,
What's this? It's all messy, isn't it?
I'm sorry, I can't do it as well as Marissa.
I didn't expect much from the start, but you're really bad at this.
I don't think of myself as a good cook. That's why I've spent a lot of time studying cooking this year, and I've been learning from Marissa as well. Despite doing nothing himself, he constantly criticizes others. As I thought about all this, I handed the carpaccio I had taken out of the fridge to Stephen. Meanwhile, Stephen sighed.
Can't even cook. Are you really okay? You're not just getting in the way, are you?
I'm fine, probably.
Well, I guess a fool can only make fish cakes in the factory. It's good that you're at least working.
Stephen laughed crudely and left the kitchen. I clenched my back teeth in frustration. Then Marissa, standing beside me, said, Don't mind him. Let's make a delicious meal and show him. Yes. I nodded emphatically and began cooking again. After finishing the Christmas meal preparations, we started getting ready for dinner. The busy time of Christmas passed. The Christmas Eve was relaxed, but Christmas Day was incredibly busy from the morning. Marissa and I were busy as relatives began to arrive.
Merry Christmas! Thanks for having us again this year.
As they said this, the relatives entered the living room. Marissa asked me to serve coffee and prepare wine. While I was doing this, all the expected guests arrived, and Stephen began his greeting.
Well, thank you all for gathering here this year. My wife has prepared the meal for Christmas, so please enjoy.
After Stephen's greeting, Tom, getting carried away, said,
Been waiting for this. Looking forward to the delicious meal again this year. Please, please. Well, this year my son's wife has also helped, so the food might not be delicious.
Stephen laughed crudely, with his usual manner. Hearing this, Tom said,
Oh, that's exciting. A woman who handles $100 million must be good at cooking. Huh? $100 million?
Stephen was surprised. A puzzled Tom asked back,
What? Stephen, you didn't know? What are you talking about? Sydney works in a factory. Yes, a factory that produces products respected worldwide. You didn't know? Worldwide? What are you talking about? You really don't know. The fish cakes made by the factory where Sydney works have become incredibly popular in France and Europe. What? France and Europe?
Stephen looked at me, surprised. I smiled and explained to Stephen. Thanks to Stephen's efforts, the factory where I worked avoided bankruptcy. Actually, it was Gabriel who made the proposal.
Proposal?
Stephen, are you aware that surimi is popular in France and Europe?
Surimi? The processed product made from finely ground fish and meat?
In France and Europe, it's mainly known as crab sticks. It's very popular because it's healthy.
What about it?
Actually, my factory also produces crab sticks, so we decided to export them in a high-quality format.
Really? That's,
It was my proposal. And with the current boom, it's been a huge hit. We secured exports worth $100 million annually, mainly to France and Europe.
So you're the woman who handles $100 million?
Well, yes, that's one way to put it. By the way, the export volume of the fish cakes Stephen mocked has also increased. Stephen bit his lip in frustration as I smiled. Then Stephen, looking away, said to me,
So what? You're still just a factory worker with no education. A fool.
I won't deny the lack of formal education, but unlike you, Stephen, people in France and Europe don't look down on others just because of their educational background. As I retorted, the relatives were delighted. Amidst laughter, several commented,
And if you can earn money, education doesn't matter. Exactly. I'd rather have a daughter-in-law who earns money like this than one with just educational qualifications. No doubt about it.
This eased the atmosphere immediately. However, Stephen seemed displeased that no one agreed with him. Perhaps being contradicted by me was also a reason for his discomfort. Regardless, Stephen was nearly bursting with anger.
What's this about a woman moving $100 million? In the end, it's just the company making money.
But the profits are shared with the employees. I received a special bonus. As I countered, Stephen pointed at me.
That's just a part of it. It's nothing compared to a lawyer who earns tens of millions of dollars a year.
I see. Yes. I was very disheartened by Stephen's attitude. In fact, as a lawyer, Stephen's annual income is tens of millions of dollars. Even though the factory where I work is profitable, my salary doesn't come close to his. Even with the bonus, there's a big difference in our annual income. Stephen's attitude is irritating, but when it comes to comparing salaries, I can't argue back. It was just when I had these thoughts. Just as I thought this, Tom slammed his glass onto the table and said,
I've been quietly listening, but you've been saying whatever you want, belittling people. It is the truth.
Stephen laughed triumphantly. However, Tom stood his ground.
Sure, Stephen may earn a lot of money, but is it really earned through honest work? What are you trying to say? Stephen, you're being sued by a client, aren't you? I know about it.
Everyone was surprised by Tom's words. All eyes turned to Stephen. Meanwhile, Stephen was panicking, clearly flustered.
What are you talking about? Disciplinary actions, was it? Something like that happening to you, right? I don't know. I don't know anything about that.
Stephen feigned ignorance, but everyone looked at him with suspicion. Amidst this, Tom continued talking with a malicious smile.
I've always been dissatisfied with Stephen's attitude, so I had a journalist friend of mine do some digging. Digging? What for? Stephen, it seems you've been mishandling money inappropriately, haven't you? No, that's wrong. I haven't done anything. Don't lie. I know everything.
Tom took out a notebook from his pocket. Then Tom began reading the contents written in the notebook.
Based on certain individuals' testimony.
Summarizing what Tom said, it went like this. A certain individual visited Stephen's law firm to file for bankruptcy. Stephen, thinking it was an easy job, quickly accepted the request. However, problems arose. Stephen had not distinguished between the retainer fee he received from the client and his own remuneration. This inappropriate handling of funds became an issue. There were also instances of Stephen hurling abuses at clients, leading to disciplinary actions against him.
There's more, bud. What should we do? If Stephen keeps belittling Sydney, I can make him feel uncomfortable.
Tom asked Stephen this. Surprised, Stephen said,
I feel unwell today, so I'll excuse myself from here. The rest, I leave to you.
And then he left the room. He went straight to his own room. As I stood there in shock, Marissa came in and said, Stephen was rude. Now, dinner is ready. Please come and eat. Oh, Marissa, let me help. Yes, please. With Marissa's arrival, the rest of Christmas proceeded as usual. Thanks to Tom's appreciation of my work, I ended up being asked to share my story with everyone. Thus, I managed to finish the traditional Christmas visit and event at the in-laws' house, which I used to find challenging. Sometime later, I received this news from Marissa. Stephen has been suspended from practicing law. Really? Well, it's time for him to take responsibility for his arrogance. It can't be helped. What will you do now? Surely not a divorce? No, I won't do that. Because you see... Marissa's story went like this. Stephen, having completely lost trust, apparently would find it difficult to work as a lawyer again. He declared he would live quietly on his savings from now on. However, Stephen couldn't do anything alone, so he deeply apologized to Marissa.
Please, don't abandon me,
Stephen said. And you forgave him? Yes, in a way. It's partly my responsibility that Stephen can't do anything. So, the truth is, I can't abandon him. I see. Something about it didn't sit right with me. But if they're okay with it, it's not my place to say anything. At the end of our conversation, Marissa said this. Oh, right. I almost forgot. I told him I'd forgive him only if he apologizes properly to Sydney. So he might be visiting Sydney's house soon. True to Marissa's words, Stephen came to our house the next day. As soon as he entered, he deeply apologized in front of Simon and me. Then he said,
I'm sorry for looking down on you all this time. Please, forgive me.
At this point, there was no more pride left in him. Stephen, whom I had disliked so much, now seemed somewhat pitiable. Whether I forgive Stephen or not, I'll think about it. Anyway, please make sure not to trouble Marissa. In the end, I said that and sent Stephen away. He seemed very dejected, so I think he must have learned his lesson. Since then, Stephen has become quieter and seems to be getting along well with Marissa. As for me, I'm in great spirits without any stress. The factory's exports are thriving, and lately, I've even started going to our French and European partners. So now, I'm striving for even higher sales. With new product development coming up, I want to forget about Stephen for a while and focus on my work.